11,700 years ago, the world transformed in ways that would forever change the course of human existence. Massive ice sheets that had gripped the northern continents in frozen silence began their slow, inevitable retreat. As temperatures rose and glacial barriers dissolved, vast territories previously locked beneath kilometers of ice opened to human exploration and habitation. The Laurentide ice sheet, which had covered much of northern North America like a crystalline blanket, began its inexorable withdrawal. Across the Atlantic, the Fennoscandian ice sheet similarly receded from northern Europe, revealing landscapes that had been hidden for millennia. These environmental transformations created unprecedented opportunities for human communities, setting the stage for what we now call the Neolithic Revolution, a period when humanity shifted from nomadic hunting and gathering to settled agricultural life, fundamentally altering our relationship with the natural world and with each other. Before we begin this journey through time, I invite you to take a moment for yourself. If you're enjoying these historical sleep stories and finding comfort in these ancient narratives, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your subscription helps us continue creating these calming explorations of human history. Don't forget to click the like button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. These small gestures of support mean the world to us and allow us to keep bringing you these peaceful journeys into the past. Now, let's continue together into the ancient world. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, we will travel back through time to witness the quiet nights of our ancestors. We will explore the gentle rhythms of early agricultural communities, the peaceful evenings in the first permanent settlements, and the serene ceremonies held beneath ancient megalithic monuments. This is not a story of conflict or drama, but rather a meditation on the simple, profound moments of rest and renewal that connected these ancient peoples to the earth, the sky, and to each other. Let the distant past wash over you like a calming tide, carrying away the stresses of the modern world and guiding you toward restful sleep. The warming climate that began around 11,700 years ago brought dramatic changes to global ecosystems, changes that unfolded slowly, imperceptibly to individual human lifespans, yet powerfully across generations. Tundra landscapes, which had stretched endlessly beneath cold skies, gradually gave way to expanding forests of birch and pine. These pioneering trees crept northward, following the retreating ice, their roots breaking through the frozen soil to establish themselves in this newly available land. Eventually, oak and elm would join them, creating the diverse temperate forests that would sustain countless generations of humans and animals alike. During these transitional millennia, the nights held a particular quality of stillness. The megafauna that had dominated Pleistocene environments, mammoths with their curved tusks and shaggy coats, giant ground sloths moving through ancient forests, cave bears sheltering in rocky overhangs, and saber-toothed cats prowling the edges of human encampments, all faced extinction as their cold-adapted habitats disappeared. The nights when these creatures walked the earth possessed a wildness we can scarcely imagine today. The trumpeting of mammoths echoed across frozen plains. The low growls of cave bears reverberated through stone chambers. The patting of great cats on soft earth signaled danger to early human communities huddled around their fires. Yet these were also nights of profound beauty and tranquility. Human groups, still living primarily as mobile hunter-gatherers, gathered around fires that pushed back the darkness and cold. The flames danced and flickered, casting moving shadows on the faces of men, women, and children who sat together, sharing stories, repairing tools, preparing food, and finding comfort in community. Above them stretched the unpolluted night sky, a vast canvas of stars that ancient peoples knew intimately. Without the light pollution of modern civilization, the Milky Way blazed across the heavens like a river of light, and individual constellations stood out with crystalline clarity. These early peoples developed sophisticated understandings of celestial patterns. They watched the moon wax and wane, tracking its cycles to predict seasonal changes and optimal times for hunting and gathering. They observed the movement of planets across the stellar background, noting their positions and patterns with the keen attention of those whose survival depended on understanding natural rhythms. The North Star guided their nighttime travels, a fixed point in the slowly wheeling sky that provided orientation and direction across unfamiliar landscapes. In the Levant region of the Near East, archaeological evidence reveals how human groups began responding to environmental changes through increasingly sophisticated resource management. The Natufian culture, which flourished between 12,500 and 9,500 BC, represents a crucial transitional phase in human development. Natufian sites like Ain Malaha and Wadi Hama 27 contain some of the earliest known permanent settlements, featuring circular stone houses with carefully plastered floors and dedicated storage facilities. These communities developed specialized tools for processing wild cereals, stone mortars and pestles worn smooth by countless hours of grinding, and sickle blades that acquired a distinctive silica gloss from cutting grass stems season after season. Imagine the nights in these early permanent settlements. Unlike their nomadic ancestors who moved camp regularly, seeking new resources and following animal migrations, Natufian people could settle into familiar sleeping spaces night after night. The circular stone houses, though simple by later standards, provided shelter from wind and rain. Plastered floors created smooth, clean surfaces where families could spread reed mats and animal skins for sleeping. Storage facilities filled with gathered foods gave a sense of security, provisions set aside against lean times, evidence of planning and foresight that extended beyond the immediate present. As darkness fell over these settlements, the daily activities of processing food and crafting tools gradually wound down. Women who had spent hours grinding wild wheat and barley into flour set aside their grinding stones, their arms aching from the repetitive motion but satisfied with the provisions they had prepared. Men who had been shaping flint blades or repairing hunting equipment carefully stored their tools, protecting valuable implements from damage. Children who had spent the day playing near the settlement and helping with age-appropriate tasks, grew drowsy as the stars emerged overhead. The Younger Dryas period, which temporarily reversed the warming trend around 10,800 BC, brought a return to near-glacial conditions across much of the northern hemisphere. This climatic reversal, possibly triggered by the collapse of the North American ice sheet disrupting ocean circulation patterns, created severe environmental stress for human communities. Archaeological evidence from sites across the eastern Mediterranean shows population decline and site abandonment during this challenging period. The cold, dry conditions reduced the availability of wild plant foods that communities had come to depend upon, forcing people to develop more intensive foraging strategies or face starvation. Yet even during this difficult time, the nights retained their essential character of rest and renewal. At Abu Huraira in Syria, excavations have revealed how communities adapted to Younger Dryas conditions through resourcefulness and innovation. Plant remains show increased reliance on small seeds, nuts and tubers, resources requiring intensive processing but available when larger game became scarce. The site's occupants developed specialized grinding stones and roasting pits to make these foods digestible and nutritious, working long hours during daylight to secure sufficient provisions. When night fell over Abu Huraira during the Younger Dryas, the settlement likely presented a scene of quiet exhaustion. People who had labored all day to process difficult foods settled into sleep with deep fatigue, their bodies demanding rest after hours of physically demanding work. The roasting pits, which had been used to prepare tubers and other gathered foods, still radiated warmth into the cooling night air. Families gathered close to these sources of heat, seeking comfort not just from the physical warmth but from the proximity to one another. The night sky during the Younger Dryas would have been particularly clear and brilliant. Cold, dry conditions create ideal atmospheric conditions for stargazing, and ancient peoples would have witnessed spectacular celestial displays. The aurora borealis, driven by solar activity, may have been visible at lower latitudes than today, painting the northern sky with shimmering curtains of green and red light. Meteor showers would have streaked across the heavens with frequency, each shooting star a moment of wonder and perhaps portent to those watching from below. Tool assemblages from Younger Dryas sites show increased standardization and efficiency, reflecting the need to maximize returns from limited resources. The people of this era developed blade production techniques that could generate dozens of sharp cutting edges from a single carefully prepared stone core. This efficiency extended to all aspects of material culture. Every scrap of hide was utilized, every bone fragment considered for potential use, every plant resource harvested with care to ensure future availability. In the evenings, as craftspeople worked by firelight to maintain and create the tools their communities needed, there would have been a meditative quality to the repetitive motions. Knapping flint to create sharp blades required focus and patience, a rhythmic pattern of striking stone against stone that produced a distinctive ringing sound. The sparks that flew with each impact briefly illuminated the knapper's concentrated face before fading into darkness. Children watching these skilled workers would have been lulled by the steady percussion, learning through observation while fighting off sleep. The end of the Younger Dryas around 11,700 BC ushered in the Holocene epoch, creating conditions that would prove ideal for agricultural development. Rising temperatures and increased precipitation expanded the ranges of wild cereals and legumes across the Fertile Crescent. Wild emmer wheat, einkorn, and barley formed dense stands in upland areas, their golden heads swaying in the breeze and catching the slanting light of sunrise and sunset. Wild lentils, peas, and chickpeas proliferated in suitable habitats, their seeds providing concentrated nutrition to those who gathered them. These plant communities, thriving in the improved climate, would provide the genetic foundation for the world's first agricultural systems. But before humans began deliberately cultivating these plants, there were countless generations of gathering, people who moved through stands of wild wheat at harvest time, using their newly developed sickle blades to cut the grain-heavy stems, collecting the seeds in carefully woven baskets, and transporting them back to their settlements for processing and storage. Picture an evening during these early harvest times. Groups of gatherers, their arms full of freshly cut grain, return to their settlement as the sun sinks toward the horizon. The golden light illuminates the grain heads they carry, making them seem to glow with inner fire. There is satisfaction in this moment, the culmination of a successful gathering expedition, the promise of abundant food in the days ahead. Children run out to greet the returning adults, excited by the prospect of the sweet, nutty flavor of freshly ground grain made into porridge or flatbread. As darkness settles over the settlement, families gather around fires to begin processing some of the grain. The rhythmic sound of stones grinding grain fills the evening air, a sound that humans would hear for thousands of years to come. A sound of sustenance, of transformation, of the patient work that turns what nature provides into food that sustains human life. The grinding is hard work, requiring strength and endurance, but it is also work that can be done while sitting, while talking, while singing. Groups of women often processed grain together, their collective effort making the work lighter and providing opportunity for social bonding and information exchange. Children, playing near the grain processing areas, eventually succumb to drowsiness. Their mothers, still working but aware of their children's state, guide them to sleeping areas where they curl up on soft skins and woven mats. The sounds of grinding, the low murmur of adult conversation, and the crackling of fires create a soundscape of safety and routine that helps children drift into peaceful sleep. They dream, perhaps, of the fields of wild grain they saw during the day, of the birds that flew up from the grain heads as people approached, of the warm bread their mothers will make from the flour being prepared even now as they sleep. The night brings coolness after the heat of the day, a refreshing change that makes sleep comfortable and deep. The stars wheel overhead in their eternal dance, the same constellations that humans have watched since time immemorial. The moon, whether full and brilliant or a slender crescent, provides gentle illumination that softens the darkness without driving it away entirely. In this balance of light and shadow, our ancestors found rest, their bodies and minds recovering from the day's exertions, preparing for the work that tomorrow would bring. The establishment of permanent settlements marked a profound shift in human existence, a transformation that affected every aspect of life including the most basic human need, sleep. For the first time in human history, people could create dedicated sleeping spaces, designed and refined over time for maximum comfort and suited to the specific needs of individual families. These sleeping areas, no longer temporary arrangements that had to be set up and dismantled with each move of a nomadic band, became familiar, personalized spaces associated with rest and renewal. Göbekli Tepe, located in southeastern Turkey, stands as perhaps the most remarkable testament to the social and technological capabilities of early Neolithic communities. Dating to approximately 9,500 BC, this extraordinary site predates Stonehenge by over 6,000 years and challenges many traditional assumptions about the relationship between agriculture and monumental architecture. The site consists of multiple circular enclosures, each containing massive T-shaped limestone pillars weighing up to 16 tons. These monoliths, quarried from nearby bedrock using only stone tools, display sophisticated carved reliefs depicting wild animals, snakes coiling across the stone surface, scorpions frozen in aggressive postures, wild boar with their distinctive profiles, aurochs with their powerful horns, and birds of prey spreading their wings. The construction of Göbekli Tepe required unprecedented levels of social organization and technological expertise, but it also created a unique nighttime environment. Imagine approaching these massive stone circles as darkness falls. The pillars, already imposing in daylight, take on an otherworldly quality in the gathering dusk. Their carved surfaces, which seem almost flat in direct sunlight, reveal depth and detail in the angled light of sunset, the reliefs casting dramatic shadows that make the stone animals seem almost alive. Archaeological analysis suggests that Göbekli Tepe served ritual purposes, a place where dispersed communities gathered periodically for ceremonies and feasts. The presence of thousands of animal bones from communal meals indicates that these gatherings involved not just religious observance but also social bonding through shared food and celebration. These multi-day gatherings would have included nights spent at or near the sacred site, nights filled with activities we can only partially reconstruct from archaeological evidence. As darkness deepened around the stone circles, fires would have been lit, not just for warmth and cooking, but to provide light for nighttime ceremonies. Flames casting their flickering glow on the carved pillars would have created a mesmerizing spectacle. The stone animals, illuminated by firelight, would have seemed to move and breathe. Shadows dancing across the reliefs would have enhanced their mysterious power, contributing to an atmosphere of sacred awe that must have profoundly affected those present. Music and chanting likely accompanied these nighttime ceremonies. The human voice, raised in song or prayer, resonates differently at night, carrying across the landscape with particular clarity in the still air. Drums made from hollow logs and animal skins would have provided rhythm, their deep thrumming felt as much as heard, vibrating through the stone beneath people's feet. Flutes carved from bone produced haunting melodies that soared above the rhythmic foundation, their high, clear notes piercing the darkness and reaching toward the stars overhead. Between ceremonial activities, people rested. They spread animal skins and woven mats on the ground, creating temporary sleeping areas around the fires. Families grouped together, parents with children nestled between them for warmth and security. The presence of so many people, perhaps hundreds gathered from settlements scattered across the surrounding region, created its own soundscape. Quiet conversations, the crying of infants being soothed by their mothers, the snoring of exhausted adults, all blended with the crackling of fires and the distant calls of nocturnal animals into an ambient sound that was both active and peaceful. Children, worn out from the excitement and unusual activities of the gathering, would have fallen asleep readily despite the unfamiliar surroundings. For them, the massive pillars standing guard around them might have seemed like protective giants, silent sentinels watching over their rest. The star-filled sky visible between the pillars provided a cosmic ceiling to their temporary sleeping chamber, vast and mysterious. Adults, too, eventually succumbed to sleep, though some would have remained awake to tend fires and watch over the sleeping community. These night watchers had time for contemplation, for looking at the stars and pondering questions of existence and meaning that have occupied human minds since we first developed the capacity for abstract thought. Why do we exist? What happens after death? What forces govern the movement of celestial bodies? What do our dreams mean? In the stillness of night, surrounded by sacred architecture and sleeping companions, these watchers touched something fundamental about human experience: the capacity to wonder, to question, to seek understanding beyond the immediate demands of survival. Pre-pottery Neolithic Jericho reveals another dimension of early Neolithic innovation and settlement life. The site's massive stone tower, standing 8.5 meters high with an internal staircase of 22 stone steps, represents one of humanity's earliest monumental constructions. Built from roughly shaped limestone blocks, each weighing several hundred kilograms, the tower required careful planning and coordinated labor. Its purpose remains debated. Was it a defensive structure, an astronomical observatory, or a ritual monument? Perhaps it served multiple functions, as many ancient structures did. Imagine standing atop this tower as darkness falls over ancient Jericho. From this elevated position, one could see over the defensive wall that extended around the settlement's perimeter, viewing the surrounding landscape as it fades from the colors of day into the monochrome palette of night. The abundant freshwater spring that made Jericho's location so valuable would have been audible even from the tower top, its constant flow creating a soothing background sound that never ceased, day or night. The tower likely had guards stationed on it during the night, watching for potential threats from competing groups who might covet Jericho's precious water source. These night guards had a lonely but important duty. As the settlement below gradually settled into sleep, fires banked for the night, conversations fading, only the occasional cry of a child or bark of a dog breaking the stillness, the guards remained alert, scanning the darkness for any sign of danger. Yet their vigil was not without its rewards. From their elevated position, they witnessed spectacular sunrises and sunsets. They watched the moon rise, enormous and orange on the horizon before climbing higher and fading to its familiar silvery white. They tracked the movement of planets across the sky, noting when Venus blazed bright as the evening star, hanging in the western sky after sunset, or when it appeared as the morning star, heralding the approach of dawn. They saw meteor showers in all their glory, unobscured by walls or vegetation. They witnessed the northern lights if atmospheric conditions were right, those mysterious dancing lights that must have seemed magical and portentous. The defensive wall of Jericho, consisting of stone foundations supporting mud brick superstructures, stood approximately 4 meters high and incorporated bastions and gates. This wall created a clear boundary between the settled, ordered world within and the wild, potentially dangerous world without. For those sleeping inside the wall, this boundary provided psychological comfort as much as physical protection. Children could be told they were safe because the wall protected them. Adults could rest easier knowing that approaching dangers would be detected by watchful guards. Inside the wall, houses featured substantial stone foundations supporting mud brick walls constructed using standardized brick sizes and techniques. Mud brick technology represented a significant innovation, allowing communities to create durable structures using locally available materials. The bricks were formed in wooden molds, dried in the sun until hard, and laid with mud mortar to create walls capable of supporting multi-story structures. Interior spaces within these houses showed increasing specialization for different activities. Storage rooms contained large ceramic vessels and stone-lined pits for preserving grain and other agricultural products. Grinding areas featured built-in installations with large grinding stones permanently mounted in plaster platforms, their surfaces worn smooth by years of use. Cooking areas included specialized ovens, hearths, and food preparation surfaces, each designed for specific tasks. And crucially, there were dedicated sleeping areas, platforms raised slightly above the floor level, spread with soft materials, spaces designated specifically for rest. The presence of dedicated sleeping areas marks an important psychological shift. Sleep was no longer just something that happened when darkness and fatigue demanded it, but an activity with its own designated space, respected and accommodated in household architecture. Families developed sleeping routines. Children settled down first, stories told or songs sung to ease them into slumber, then adults following once all necessary tasks were completed and preparations made for the next day. The night sounds of an early agricultural village like Jericho would have included both human and animal elements. Dogs, which had been domesticated thousands of years earlier and served as guards and hunting companions, would have barked occasionally at unfamiliar sounds or scents. Goats and sheep, if kept within the settlement at night for protection, would have shifted and bleated softly in their pens. The wind might whistle through gaps in mud brick walls, a sound familiar enough to be comforting rather than alarming. From outside the walls might come the calls of wild animals, the howl of jackals, the screech of an owl, the distant roar of a lion, reminders that the wild world continued its activities regardless of human presence. Within houses, the sounds of sleep itself created their own gentle symphony. The slow, deep breathing of adults in deep sleep. The occasional murmur or whimper as someone dreamed. The shifting of bodies on sleeping platforms, seeking more comfortable positions. The soft sounds of nursing infants, their mothers half awake to tend to their needs. These sounds, intimate and familiar, created an acoustic environment that signaled safety and normalcy, allowing all within to relax into the trust that tomorrow would come, and they would face it rested and renewed. The transformation of wild plants into domestic varieties required not just botanical knowledge but also patience, attention, and faith in the future. Early farmers needed to recognize desirable traits in individual plants, save seeds from those superior specimens, and maintain breeding populations large enough to prevent inbreeding depression. This process demanded detailed knowledge of planting seasons, soil requirements, water needs, and harvesting techniques. Knowledge accumulated over generations and carefully transmitted from parent to child, from experienced farmer to young learner. The 8 founder crops of the Fertile Crescent, emmer wheat, einkorn wheat, barley, lentils, peas, chickpeas, bitter vetch, and flax, each had their own requirements and characteristics. Emmer wheat, with its large seeds containing approximately 12 to 15% protein and substantial carbohydrate reserves, grew best in upland regions with 300 to 700 millimeters of annual rainfall. Farmers learned through experience which slopes and elevations produced the best yields, which soil types retain moisture most effectively, which companion plants should be encouraged and which eliminated. Imagine an evening during the planting season. Farmers who have spent the day broadcasting seeds across prepared fields return home as dusk approaches, their hands tired from scattering thousands of tiny seeds, their backs aching from bending and walking. Yet there is also anticipation in their hearts. They have planted the future. Those seeds, if conditions are favorable, if the rains come at the right time, if pests and diseases don't devastate the crop, will grow into plants that will feed their families and their community for months to come. That night, as they settle into sleep, they offer prayers to whatever deities or spirits they believe govern agricultural success. These prayers, offered in darkness and sincerity, represent humanity's first systematic attempts to influence natural forces through supernatural means. Let the rains come, they pray. Let the seeds sprout and grow strong. Protect the young plants from locusts and birds. Let the grain heads fill with plump, nutritious seeds. Grant us a successful harvest. The rhythm of agricultural seasons created new nighttime rituals and observances. The planting season, the growing season, the harvest season, and the dormant season each had their own character and their own ceremonies. During planting, prayers and offerings sought to secure favorable conditions for the new crop. During the growing season, watchful nights might be spent in fields, protecting vulnerable young plants from animals that would eat them. During harvest, long days of intensive labor were followed by nights of exhausted sleep, bodies pushed to their limits to bring in the crop before weather or pests could destroy it. During the dormant season, when fields lay fallow and agricultural labor was minimal, there was time for reflection, for storytelling, for the transmission of cultural knowledge from old to young. The harvest season deserves special attention, for it represented the culmination of a year's agricultural labor and the source of food security for the year ahead. As grain ripened in the fields, turning from green to gold, entire communities mobilized for the harvest. Everyone capable of work participated: men, women, children, elders who could no longer do heavy labor but could help with lighter tasks. The harvest had to be completed quickly once the grain reached optimal ripeness, before storms could flatten the standing grain or before the grain heads shattered naturally, scattering seeds that humans needed to collect. Harvest days began before dawn and extended until darkness made work impossible. By firelight, if the moon was bright enough, work might continue even into the night. The cut grain, tied into sheaves, was transported to threshing floors where it would be processed. The steady swish of sickles cutting through grain stalks, the rustling of grain being bundled, the voices of workers calling to each other, the songs people sang to coordinate their efforts and maintain morale, all created a soundscape unique to harvest time. When night finally brought an end to the day's labor, the exhaustion was profound. Harvesters who had been working since before dawn, bent over in the fields or threshing grain, could barely stand. They made their way back to the settlement, their arms full of grain, their bodies screaming for rest. The evening meal during harvest time was a simple affair. People were too tired for elaborate preparations. Quick cooking grains made into porridge, perhaps with a bit of preserved meat or vegetables, was enough. The main focus was sleep. And what sleep it was. The deep, dreamless sleep of complete physical exhaustion, the kind of sleep where one lies down and immediately loses consciousness, not waking until the first light of dawn signals that another day of harvest labor is upon them. This sleep was both necessary and earned. Necessary because the body could not function without it, earned through honest labor that directly sustained life. But harvest time also brought celebration. Once the grain was safely gathered and stored, once the immediate crisis of getting the harvest in before it could be lost was past, communities held harvest festivals. These celebrations, which might last for several days, involved feasting, music, dancing, and expressions of gratitude to whatever powers people believed had granted them a successful harvest. Harvest festival nights were among the most joyous of the year. After months of hard work and anxious watching to see if the harvest would succeed, people could finally relax and celebrate. Large fires were built, not just for light and warmth but as focal points for community gathering. Meat, usually consumed sparingly during ordinary times, was plentiful during harvest festivals as animals were sacrificed as offerings or simply to provide feast foods. Fresh baked bread made from newly harvested grain had a special quality, a freshness and flavor that couldn't be matched later in the year when stored grain had aged. Music filled the night air during these celebrations. Drums provided rhythmic foundation, their beats echoing across the landscape. Flutes and other wind instruments carried melodies that made people want to move, to dance. And dance they did. Circle dances where entire communities joined hands and moved together in synchronized patterns. Couple dances where partners moved in response to each other. Solo dances where individuals expressed their joy and energy through movement. Children, allowed to stay up later than usual during festival nights, watched the dancing with wide eyes, occasionally joining in when the movements were simple enough for them to follow. Eventually, though, even the excitement of the festival couldn't keep their eyes open. They would curl up near the fires, wrapped in cloaks or blankets, and fall asleep to the sounds of celebration continuing around them. Parents, passing by during the dancing, would check on their sleeping children, adjusting a blanket or moving a child slightly farther from the fire if they'd rolled too close. Small gestures of care and protection even in the midst of celebration. As the night wore on and even adult energy began to flag, the dancing slowed and eventually stopped. People gathered in smaller groups, sitting around fires, talking quietly, telling stories, simply enjoying the companionship of community. These were the times when elders might share stories of past harvests, of years when the harvest failed and times were hard, of years when the harvest was so abundant that storage facilities overflowed. These stories served multiple purposes. They entertained, they educated younger listeners about the variability of agricultural success, they reinforced cultural memory and community identity. Finally, even these quiet conversations would trail off. The fires, no longer actively fed, would burn down to glowing coals. People would make their way to their homes, walking slowly, contentedly tired, ready for sleep. The settlement would gradually quiet, the only sounds the crackling of dying fires and the soft breathing of sleepers. In distant China, along the Yangtze River Valley, communities were developing their own agricultural traditions based on rice cultivation. The Shangshan site in the Yangtze River Delta has yielded some of the earliest evidence for rice cultivation, including wooden mortars and pestles specifically designed for processing rice grains. The development of rice agriculture required specialized techniques for managing water levels and creating artificial wetlands, creating a form of farming quite different from the dryland grain cultivation of the Fertile Crescent. Imagine the nights in early rice farming villages. The rice paddies, flooded during the growing season, reflected the night sky like mirrors, creating the illusion that stars existed both above and below. Frogs, which thrived in the wetland environments created by rice cultivation, filled the night air with their calls, a dense chorus of croaking that rose and fell in natural rhythms. This sound, so characteristic of rice-growing regions even today, would have been the nighttime soundtrack for early rice farmers. The work of rice cultivation had its own rhythms and demands. Transplanting rice seedlings required workers to stand in water for hours, bent over, carefully placing each delicate seedling into the mud. This backbreaking work was often done by groups working together, their movements synchronized, their voices raised in work songs that helped maintain the rhythm and made the labor more bearable. By night, after a day of such work, farmers' legs would ache from standing in water, their backs would be stiff from constant bending, their hands would be cramped from the repetitive motions of transplanting. Yet there was also something meditative about this work, a quality that carried over into the evening hours. The connection to water, to growing things, to the cycles of the seasons, created a different kind of agricultural spirituality than that of dryland farming. Water itself became sacred, the source of life, the medium in which rice grew, the mirror that reflected the heavens. Evening rituals might involve offerings to water spirits, prayers for favorable flooding, gratitude for the life-giving properties of water. In Mesoamerica, the domestication of squash beginning around 8000 BC represented another independent development of agriculture. Wild squash produced small, bitter fruits with hard shells, valued primarily for their nutritious seeds rather than their flesh. Through careful selection over many generations, farmers developed varieties with larger fruits, reduced bitterness, and thinner shells that made the flesh edible and nutritious. The nights in early Mesoamerican farming villages would have had their own distinctive character. The climate, quite different from either the Fertile Crescent or China, created different conditions and challenges. During the rainy season, afternoon thunderstorms brought dramatic displays of lightning and thunder, followed by evenings with high humidity and slowly clearing skies. During the dry season, nights could be cool and clear, perfect for stargazing and outdoor activities. Squash cultivation, which would eventually become part of the famous Three Sisters agricultural system along with maize and beans, created its own seasonal rhythm. Planting occurred at the beginning of the rainy season, when the first storms had softened the soil enough for planting. Growing plants needed to be tended, weeded around, protected from pests, occasionally watered if rains were insufficient. Harvest came when fruits reached full size and the rinds had hardened, providing natural protection for the nutritious flesh and seeds within. Evening meals in squash-growing communities often featured this versatile crop. The flesh could be roasted directly in fires, steaming inside its own rind until tender and sweet. Seeds could be dried and later toasted, creating a crunchy, nutritious snack. The hard rinds of certain varieties could be cleaned and dried, becoming containers for water or food storage, utilitarian items that every household needed. As people settled to sleep after an evening meal featuring squash in various forms, they carried with them the satisfaction of eating food they themselves had planted, tended, and harvested. This direct connection between labor and sustenance, between human effort and the fruits, literally, of that effort, created a different psychological relationship to food than hunting and gathering had provided. The food was theirs in a new way, not just something taken from nature's bounty, but something created through a partnership between human intention and natural growth. Çatalhöyük in central Anatolia stands as the most remarkable example of early urban development from this period, representing a quantum leap in settlement size, social complexity, and architectural sophistication. Occupied continuously from approximately 7500 to 6400 BC, this site supported a population estimated between 3,000 and 8,000 individuals at its peak, making it one of the largest human settlements in existence at that time. The site's 13 hectares contained densely packed rectangular houses constructed using standardized mud brick techniques, with structures built directly against one another to create a honeycomb-like urban fabric that maximized land use efficiency while providing structural stability. The architectural organization of Çatalhöyük created a unique nighttime environment unlike anything that had come before. The settlement had no ground-level streets or pathways. Instead, houses were accessed through openings in their roofs, with residents climbing down wooden ladders into their homes. The rooftops themselves served as the primary pedestrian network, creating what was essentially a second settlement level elevated above the actual living spaces. Picture the approach of evening in Çatalhöyük. As the sun sinks toward the horizon, its slanting rays illuminate the rooftop level, casting long shadows from chimneys, ladders, and people moving across this elevated cityscape. The rooftops, which have been busy with activity during the day, people moving between houses, conducting outdoor tasks, socializing with neighbors, begin to empty as families retreat down their ladders into their homes for the evening meal and eventual sleep. Inside the houses, which typically measured about 4 by 5 meters, the organization of space reflected both practical needs and cultural values. Raised platforms along the walls served multiple functions: seating during waking hours, sleeping areas at night, and work surfaces for various domestic tasks. These platforms were constructed using carefully laid mud brick foundations covered with lime plaster that was renewed regularly, creating smooth, clean surfaces. The plaster was often painted, and some houses featured elaborate decorative schemes on their walls, geometric patterns, representations of human figures, and most dramatically, depictions of animals both domestic and wild. The interior walls of many houses featured remarkable decorative schemes that combined painted plaster, relief sculptures, and carefully arranged animal skulls and horns. Wall paintings depicted complex scenes, groups of human figures engaged in what might be hunting scenes, geometric patterns that may have held symbolic meaning, and what appear to be landscape views of the surrounding volcanic terrain, including the twin peaks of the nearby Hasan Dag volcano. As darkness filled the houses of Çatalhöyük, these wall paintings and reliefs would have been illuminated by firelight from hearths and oil lamps. The flickering, moving light would have animated the static images, making painted figures seem to shift and move, making the relief sculptures cast dramatic shadows that changed with every flicker of the flame. Three-dimensional wall reliefs featured leopards, bears, and vultures modeled in clay and painted with mineral pigments, creating dramatic focal points within domestic spaces that must have been especially striking by firelight. Beneath the sleeping platforms, Çatalhöyük residents buried their dead in flexed positions, wrapped in textiles and accompanied by personal possessions including obsidian tools, bone ornaments, and ceramic vessels. This practice of burying the dead literally beneath the living created a powerful physical and symbolic connection between generations. The dead were not removed to distant cemeteries but remained as part of the household, their bones resting beneath the very platforms where their descendants slept. This intimate relationship between the living and the dead must have profoundly affected the nighttime experience in Çatalhöyük. As family members settled onto sleeping platforms for the night, they lay directly above the remains of their ancestors, grandparents, great-grandparents, more distant ancestors stretching back generations. Did children ask about the bones beneath them? Did parents tell stories of those buried below? Tales of their lives, their accomplishments, the trials they had endured? Did the presence of ancestral remains provide comfort, a sense of continuity and connection, or did it sometimes inspire unease, particularly when strange sounds or dreams disturbed sleep? The concentration of specialized craft production at Çatalhöyük reached levels unprecedented in earlier settlements. Archaeological evidence indicates the presence of full-time specialists producing goods for both local consumption and long-distance trade. Obsidian tool production represented the site's most significant industry, utilizing volcanic glass from nearby sources at Hasan Dag and Gala Dag volcanoes. The quality of Çatalhöyük obsidian tools was exceptional, with pressure-flaked blades achieving sharpness comparable to modern surgical instruments while maintaining durability superior to contemporary flint implements. The obsidian workshops at Catalhoyuk contain specialized tool kits, pressure flakers made from carefully shaped antler tines, stone anvils for supporting workpieces, leather pads for protecting hands during napping operations. Some of this work may have been done during daylight hours when natural light provided optimal visibility for the detailed work of creating razor-sharp blades. But preparation work, sorting obsidian by quality, preparing cores for blade production, organizing and storing finished blades, could have been done by firelight in the evenings. Imagine an obsidian worker settling into his home for the evening. His hands, calloused and scarred from years of working with sharp stone, still bear fresh cuts from the day's work, tiny nicks and slices that are inevitable when working with obsidian, which can produce edges sharper than steel. He cleans these cuts carefully, perhaps treating them with plant-based salves that help prevent infection. His eyes, strained from hours of close focus on detailed work, ache slightly. He rubs them, then blinks, allowing them to adjust to the dimmer light of the interior space. His family, wife, children, perhaps aged parents, gather around the hearth for the evening meal. The conversation includes discussion of the day's work. How many blades were successfully produced? Were there any problems with the obsidian cores? Hidden flaws that caused them to fracture wrong? Are there orders to fill, requests from community members or traders from distant settlements who will carry Catalhoyuk obsidian to faraway destinations? After the meal, after the children have been settled onto the sleeping platforms, the obsidian worker might spend a quiet hour organizing materials for the next day's work, or he might simply rest, his skilled hands idle for once, his mind drifting between waking and sleeping. The familiar sounds of his home surround him, the crackling of the fire, the soft breathing of sleeping children, the quiet conversation of neighbors audible through the shared walls, the distant barking of dogs somewhere in the settlement. Textile production at Catalhoyuk achieved extraordinary sophistication, with preserved fabric fragments demonstrating complex weaving techniques and sophisticated dyeing methods. The site's inhabitants produced textiles using both wool from domestic sheep and plant fibers from wild and cultivated sources. Microscopic analysis of textile remains reveals the use of multiple fiber types within individual fabrics, creating materials with varying properties suited to different applications. The work of textile production, spinning fibers into thread, weaving thread into fabric, dyeing fabric to create colors and patterns, was largely done by women, though there's no reason to assume that division of labor was absolute or that men never participated in these tasks. Much of this work could be done in the evenings, by firelight, while supervising children or engaging in conversation with family members. Spinning, in particular, was well suited to evening work. Using a drop spindle, a wooden shaft weighted with a clay or stone whorl, a spinner could create thread while sitting comfortably, requiring little light beyond what a fire or oil lamp provided. The motion became automatic with practice, fingers drafting fibers from the mass of prepared wool or flax, the spindle twirling as it dropped, adding twist to the fibers and converting them into strong thread. A skilled spinner could maintain this work while talking, while singing, while keeping an eye on children, while letting her mind wander to other thoughts. The repetitive, rhythmic nature of spinning made it almost meditative. The same motions repeated thousands of times, the same result each time, fluffy, loose fibers transformed into strong, useful thread. As evening progressed toward night, as children grew drowsy and conversation lulled, the act of spinning could become almost hypnotic, helping to prepare the spinner herself for sleep. Weaving required more space and more light than spinning, making it less suitable for evening work, but the preparation of materials for weaving, sorting threads by color, measuring out the quantity needed for a particular project, planning the patterns and designs to be woven, could be done in the evenings. Women might gather to discuss weaving projects, sharing ideas about patterns, advising each other on technical challenges, comparing the qualities of different thread preparations. The social organization necessary to coordinate complex craft production and maintain urban infrastructure in a settlement the size of Catalhoyuk required new forms of leadership and decision-making processes. Archaeological evidence suggests the emergence of social hierarchies based on craft specialization, trade relationships, and possibly ritual authority. Some houses at Catalhoyuk contain significantly more elaborate decorative schemes, larger storage facilities, and greater quantities of exotic goods, indicating differential access to resources and status markers. However, the overall similarity in house sizes and basic architectural features suggest that social stratification remained relatively limited compared to later urban societies. There were no palaces, no monumental residences that dwarfed ordinary homes. The differences between households, while real, were matters of degree rather than kind. Perhaps this relative equality contributed to social stability, allowing so many people to live together in such close quarters for so many generations without the kind of social upheaval that might have destroyed the settlement. As night settled fully over Catalhoyuk, the settlement would have presented a strange sight from outside. With no ground-level entrances, no streets, and access only through roof openings, the settlement would have appeared as a relatively solid mass punctured by points of light where fires and lamps inside houses sent smoke and light upward through the roof openings. These points of light, multiplied by hundreds as most households kept fires burning into the evening, would have created a distinctive glow visible from some distance. Inside the houses, as fires burned lower and lamps flickered toward exhaustion, families settled into sleep. The arrangement of sleeping areas generally placed adults and older children on the larger platforms while younger children slept in more protected positions, perhaps in alcoves or on smaller platforms. Infants slept with their mothers, close enough for nighttime nursing with minimal disturbance to either mother or child. The sounds of a settlement of thousands gradually sleeping created their own unique acoustic environment. The settlement never fell completely silent. With so many people in such close proximity, there was always something happening somewhere. A baby crying, soothed by its mother's quiet voice and the comfort of nursing. A restless sleeper shifting position on their platform. A cough, a snore, the murmur of a couple speaking quietly before sleep. Dogs barking at some disturbance, real or imagined. The settling and creaking of mud brick structures cooling after the heat of the day. These sounds, rather than disturbing sleep, provided a kind of ambient reassurance. The sounds of community, of shared life, of safety in numbers. Children growing up in Catalhoyuk knew no other way of life. For them, sleeping in a room whose walls were decorated with paintings and reliefs, sleeping above the bones of ancestors, sleeping in a house that was literally connected to dozens of other houses, all occupied by families they knew, was simply normal. This was how people lived. This was home. And when they closed their eyes at night, surrounded by family, they felt safe and content in the only world they knew. The revolution in ceramic technology during the 7th millennium BC represented one of humanity's most significant material innovations. While pottery production had appeared much earlier in East Asia, around 20,000 BC among hunter-gatherer societies of the Jaman culture in Japan, the ceramic revolution in agricultural societies of the Near East and Europe involved fundamentally different technological approaches and functional requirements suited to the needs of settled farming communities managing substantial food surpluses. The technical challenges of pottery production demanded sophisticated understanding of clay mineralogy, temper selection, and firing chemistry. Early potters learned to identify suitable clay deposits, typically found in river valleys and lake margins where fine-grained sediments had accumulated over geological time periods. These clays required careful preparation, weathering to break down any rock fragments, crushing to create uniform consistency, and mixing with organic or mineral tempers to prevent cracking during drying and firing. Much of this preparatory work could be done in the evenings, after the day's other tasks were completed. Imagine a potter settling in for an evening of clay preparation. She has collected raw clay from a known deposit, bringing it back to her workshop in baskets. Now she spreads it out on a clean surface, removing any large stones or plant material she finds. She adds temper, in her case, finely crushed pottery shards from broken vessels, a material known as grog that helps prevent cracking and improves the workability of the clay. The mixing of clay and temper is physical work, requiring hands strong enough to knead the clay thoroughly, working the temper evenly throughout the mass. It's similar to kneading bread dough, though more resistant, more challenging to the hands and arms. The potter works steadily, rhythmically, adding water as needed to achieve the right consistency. Not too wet, not too dry, but perfectly plastic, ready to be formed into vessels. This work can be meditative. The potter's hands know what they're doing from long practice. Her mind can wander while her hands continue their work. She might think about the vessels she plans to create, their shapes, their sizes, their purposes. Will she make large storage jars for grain? Cooking pots for preparing meals? Fine serving dishes for special occasions? Each requires different techniques, different forms, different considerations. Or her mind might wander to other topics entirely. She might think about her children, about her relationships, about events in the community, about the changing seasons and what they mean for planting and harvest. The clay preparation work provides a framework for thinking, her hands busy but her mind free to roam. When the clay reaches the right consistency, she sets it aside to rest. a process called aging that improves its workability. Tomorrow or the next day she'll use it to create vessels. But for now her work is done. She washes her hands, removing the clay that has accumulated under her fingernails and in the creases of her skin. Her hands, stained permanently by years of working with clay, will never be truly clean, but she gets them clean enough for comfort. The construction of pottery vessels took various forms depending on regional traditions and the intended use of the final product. Coil building methods, involving the spiral construction of vessel walls using clay ropes, provided structural strength and allowed for the creation of large storage containers capable of holding hundreds of liters of grain or liquid. This technique could be used for evening work, building up a vessel layer by layer over several sessions. Picture a potter beginning a new vessel. She rolls clay between her hands and against a smooth work surface, creating long ropes of uniform thickness. These ropes are then spiraled upward, one layer atop another, to create the walls of the vessel. As each coil is added, the potter uses her fingers, smoothing tools, or wet cloths to blend it into the coil below, ensuring that the joints are strong and won't separate during drying or firing. The work proceeds slowly, carefully. A large storage jar might take many evenings to complete, the potter working for an hour or two each night, adding height to the vessel gradually. This slow construction actually has advantages. It allows each layer to firm up slightly before the next is added, preventing the vessel from sagging under its own weight as it grows taller. The potter works by firelight or lamplight, her hands moving with practiced confidence even in the dim illumination. The growing vessel takes shape before her, its form emerging from the raw clay through her skilled manipulation. There's deep satisfaction in this creative work, in seeing something useful and beautiful emerge from simple earth and water through human skill and intention. Sometimes children watch the potter work, fascinated by the transformation they're witnessing. The potter might invite a child to try, guiding small hands in rolling coils, showing them how to join them together. Most attempts will be clumsy at first, but the potter remembers her own early efforts and is patient with the child's learning process. Who knows? Perhaps this child will become a potter themselves someday, learning the craft through these evening sessions, gradually developing the skills and knowledge that define a master potter. Firing technology represented perhaps the most critical and dramatic aspect of ceramic production, requiring precise control of temperature, atmosphere, and timing to achieve durable, functional vessels. Early potters developed open-firing techniques using wood, dung, or straw as fuel sources, carefully arranging vessels in shallow pits or on surface fires to ensure even heat distribution. These fires typically reach temperatures between 600 and 800 degrees Celsius, sufficient to drive off remaining moisture and initiate the chemical changes that transformed clay into ceramic material. The firing process often took place at night for several practical reasons. Nighttime temperatures were cooler, making the intense heat of the firing process more comfortable for the potter monitoring it. The darkness made it easier to judge the temperature of the fire by the color of the flames and the glow of the vessels themselves. Experienced potters learned to read these visual cues accurately. And perhaps most importantly, a large firing required someone to tend it constantly, feeding fuel and monitoring progress, and doing this at night meant that daytime hours remained available for other necessary tasks. Imagine the scene of a nighttime firing. The potter has spent days, perhaps weeks, preparing for this event. She has created multiple vessels, allowed them to dry completely, and arranged them carefully in or near her firing pit. She has gathered ample fuel, dried wood, animal dung that has been dried and stored specifically for this purpose, dried grass and straw. Everything is ready. As darkness falls, she lights the fire. Initially, the temperature must rise slowly to avoid thermal shock that could crack the vessels. She feeds the fire carefully, gradually increasing its intensity. The glow begins to illuminate the surrounding area, pushing back the darkness, creating a warm sphere of light in which the potter works. Hours pass. The potter maintains her vigil, feeding the fire, watching the vessels as they begin to glow red with heat. She can judge the temperature by the color. First a dull red, then brighter, moving toward orange as the temperature climbs. When the color indicates the right temperature range, she maintains it, keeping the fuel supply steady, preventing the temperature from dropping or climbing too high. Other community members might come to watch, drawn by the dramatic spectacle of the firing. Children's eyes widen at the sight of the glowing vessels, amazed that earth and water could be transformed by fire into something hard and permanent. Adults appreciate the potter's skill, understanding how much knowledge and experience are required to successfully fire pottery. The firing continues for hours, often extending past midnight into the early morning hours. The potter, though tired, remains focused. Too much inattention, too much variation in temperature, could ruin an entire batch of vessels, wasting weeks of work and precious materials. So she watches, she feeds the fire, she maintains the conditions that will produce successful results. Finally, as dawn approaches, the firing is complete. The potter allows the fire to burn down gradually, preventing thermal shock from too rapid cooling. As the vessels cool and the glow fades, she can finally rest, exhausted but satisfied, knowing that when the vessels are cool enough to handle, she'll see the results of her work. Pottery that will serve her community for years to come, storing food, cooking meals, serving guests, functioning as essential tools of daily life. Surface treatments and decorative techniques demonstrated the artistic sophistication of early ceramic traditions while serving functional purposes related to vessel performance and cultural identity. Burnishing techniques, involving the rubbing of leather-hard clay surfaces with smooth stones or bone tools, created dense, water-resistant surfaces ideal for liquid storage. This work, too, could be done in the evenings, the rhythmic rubbing motion creating a meditative activity that prepared vessels for firing while calming the potter's mind. Painted decoration became increasingly elaborate during this period, with potters developing sophisticated pigment preparation techniques using iron oxides, manganese compounds, and organic materials to create red, black, brown, and cream-colored paints. The Hassuna culture of northern Mesopotamia produced ceramics with intricate geometric patterns applied using brushes made from animal hair or plant fibers, decorative schemes that often carried symbolic meanings related to community identity, ritual practices, or seasonal cycles. Picture a potter decorating a vessel by lamplight. She has prepared her paints, mineral pigments ground fine and mixed with water to create the right consistency. She has brushes of various sizes, each suited to different types of lines or fills. The vessel before her has been formed, dried to leather-hard consistency, and burnished to a smooth surface. Now she adds decoration. Her hand is steady as she applies paint, creating geometric patterns that follow traditional designs passed down through generations. These patterns are not arbitrary, they carry meaning, though that meaning might be partly lost to us today. Perhaps certain patterns denote the potter's family or clan. Perhaps they reference natural phenomena, the path of the sun across the sky, the phases of the moon, the cycle of seasons. Perhaps they invoke protective powers or express prayers for abundance. The work requires concentration and skill. A shaky hand, an uneven line, a design element placed wrongly, can ruin the overall effect. The potter works slowly, deliberately, checking her progress, sometimes pausing to consider the next element before committing to it. The lamplight flickers slightly, causing shadows to shift across the vessel's surface, but the potter's practiced eye accounts for this, seeing past the moving shadows to the design she's creating. Hours might pass as she decorates a single vessel, especially if the design is complex. But time spent in focused creative work passes differently than time spent in drudgery. There's a flow state that artists of all eras have experienced, where time seems to stop, where nothing exists except the work and the worker's engagement with it. The potter might look up, surprised to find that the night has advanced far more than she realized, that her lamp needs refilling, that her back aches from bending over the work. But the vessel is decorated, the design complete. Tomorrow it will continue drying, and eventually it will be fired, the painted designs becoming permanent parts of the finished pottery. For now, though, the potter sets it carefully aside and finally allows herself to rest, her creative work done, her mind satisfied with what she has accomplished. The advancement of textile production paralleled ceramic innovations in complexity and technological sophistication. The development of the vertical warp-weighted loom, evidenced by numerous clay loom weights found at sites across Europe and the Near East, allowed weavers to create large, complex textiles with consistent thread tension and intricate pattern work. These looms featured vertical wooden frames supporting warped threads held taut by carefully calibrated clay weights, while horizontal weft threads were inserted using wooden shuttles and beaten into place with bone or wooden beaters. Weaving, unlike many crafts, required good light to do well. The interlacing of warp and weft threads, the creation of patterns through systematic variation in the weaving sequence, the detection of errors before they could propagate through the fabric, all demanded visual acuity that was difficult to achieve by firelight or lamplight. Most weaving was therefore done during daylight hours. But the preparation for weaving and the finishing of woven textiles could be done in the evenings. A weaver might spend evening hours sorting threads by color, planning the sequence of a complex pattern, or working on the finishing touches of a completed textile, hemming edges, reinforcing corners, perhaps adding decorative fringes or tassels. Imagine a weaver sitting by her fire in the evening, a newly completed textile spread across her lap. She examines it carefully, checking for any flaws, missed threads, uneven tension, pattern errors. Finding a small imperfection, she makes a repair, her needle flashing in the firelight as she weaves it through the fabric, correcting the error so seamlessly that no one would ever detect it. She's proud of this textile. The pattern is complex, requiring concentration and skill to execute correctly. The colors, achieved through dyeing threads with plant-based dyes, are rich and even. The weave is tight and regular, creating a fabric that will be both durable and beautiful. It might become a garment for someone of high status, or a special cloth used in ceremonies, or a trade good that will travel far from this settlement, carrying evidence of her skill to distant communities. As she works on the finishing touches, she thinks about the next textile she'll create. Should she try a new pattern? Experiment with different color combinations? Create something larger and more ambitious than anything she's attempted before? The possibilities seem endless, limited only by the availability of materials and her own imagination and skill. Her children, watching her work, see not just the practical activity of textile production but also the creativity and artistry involved. They understand that their mother is not merely making cloth but creating beauty, producing work that others admire and value. This understanding shapes their own sense of possibility, their understanding of what humans can create with skill and dedication. The construction of massive stone monuments across Atlantic Europe during the 4th and 3rd millennia BC required organizational capabilities that exceeded even the most ambitious earlier projects. These megalithic structures, dolmens, menhirs, passage tombs, and stone circles, represented far more than impressive displays of engineering prowess. They embodied complex cosmological beliefs, served as focal points for community identity, and created enduring connections between the living and the dead that would influence human behavior for millennia. The passage tomb at Newgrange, completed around 3200 BC, involved the precise placement of over 200,000 tons of stone transported from quarries scattered across a radius of 80 kilometers. The builders selected specific rock types for different architectural elements. White quartz cobbles from the Wicklow Mountains for the exterior facade, creating a brilliant reflective surface visible from great distances. Granite boulders from the Mourne Mountains for structural elements requiring superior strength, and local limestone for the corbelled roof construction that has kept the interior completely dry for over 5,000 years. Imagine approaching Newgrange as evening falls. The setting sun strikes the white quartz facade, making the entire monument seem to glow with inner light. The massive structure rises from the landscape like a man-made hill, its artificial nature evident in the geometric precision of its construction. The entrance, oriented precisely to receive the rays of the rising sun during the winter solstice, remains in shadow as the day ends, a dark mouth leading into the heart of the monument. As darkness deepens, a different quality emerges. The monument, so visibly impressive in daylight, becomes mysterious, almost otherworldly. The white quartz that blazed in sunlight now reflects starlight and moonlight with a gentler glow. The massive stones seem to hold the day's warmth, radiating it slowly into the cooling night air. Around the monument, people gather for ceremonies that we can only partially reconstruct from archaeological evidence and ethnographic parallels. These nighttime ceremonies at Newgrange and similar monuments likely involved multiple elements working together to create powerful emotional and spiritual experiences. Fires would have been lit around the monument's exterior, their flames dancing and throwing moving shadows across the ancient stones. The contrast between firelight and darkness, between the human scale of the gathered people and the monumental scale of the structure they had created, would have been dramatically heightened in nighttime conditions. Music played a crucial role in these ceremonies. Drums, their deep tones resonating through the ground itself, provided rhythmic foundation. The vibrations from large drums could be felt as much as heard, particularly when drums were played near or inside megalithic chambers where stone walls amplified and prolonged the sound. Flutes and other wind instruments carried melodies that seemed to come from the spirit world itself, their high, clear notes cutting through the drum rhythms and rising toward the stars overhead. Chanting and singing added the human voice to the instrumental music. Imagine the effect of dozens or hundreds of voices raised together in song, the sound echoing off the massive stones, seeming to be answered by the monument itself. The lyrics of these songs, forever lost to us, might have told stories of ancestors, invoked protective spirits, celebrated seasonal transitions, or expressed gratitude for harvests and successful hunts. The act of singing together, of blending individual voices into a unified whole, created bonds of community and shared identity that extended beyond the moment itself. The passage at Newgrange leads 19 meters into the heart of the mound, opening into a cross-shaped chamber with corbelled ceiling rising 6 meters above the chamber floor. This interior space, completely dark except for any light brought in by those entering, created a profound sensory experience. Archaeological evidence suggests that bodies and cremated remains were placed in the chamber's recesses, making this a space that literally housed the ancestors. Ceremonies that involved entering the passage and chamber at night would have been especially powerful. Imagine a procession moving slowly from the firelit exterior into the passage, leaving the light and warmth of the fires behind. Torches or oil lamps provide minimal illumination, enough to prevent stumbling but not enough to fully dispel the darkness. The passage walls close in on both sides, massive stones overhead, the way forward narrowing and constricting before opening into the chamber itself. Inside the chamber, perhaps a few lamps burn, their flames barely adequate to illuminate the space. The corbelled ceiling disappears into darkness overhead, seeming to reach toward infinity. The carved stones that line the passage and chamber display their intricate spiral and lozenge patterns in the flickering light, the design seeming to move and shift as shadows dance across their surfaces. The air is cool and still, carrying perhaps a faint earthy smell from the ancient stones and soil. Those who enter this space do so with reverence and perhaps some trepidation. This is the realm of the ancestors, the boundary between the world of the living and whatever lies beyond death. Offerings might be left, food, pottery vessels, precious objects, gifts to the ancestors or to whatever powers govern this liminal space. Prayers might be spoken or chanted, voices echoing in the stone chamber with strange resonance that makes them sound other than human. The winter solstice phenomenon at Newgrange, when the rising sun on the shortest day of the year sends a beam of light down the 19-meter passage to illuminate the chamber for approximately 17 minutes, was certainly understood and celebrated by the monument's builders and users. But we should not imagine that this was the only time the monument was visited or used ceremonially. Throughout the year, particularly on significant dates in the agricultural or ritual calendar, people would have come to Newgrange to conduct ceremonies, to commune with ancestors, to mark important transitions in individual or community life. Nighttime visits to the monument would have had particular significance. The darkness itself becomes part of the ritual experience, representing the unknown, the mysterious, the realm of spirits and ancestors. The small lights that humans bring, their fires, torches and lamps, push back the darkness only slightly, creating islands of illumination in a sea of night. This relationship between light and darkness, between the known and unknown, between human warmth and cosmic vastness, formed a central part of megalithic spirituality. Dolmens, the most widespread category of megalithic monuments, appeared across Atlantic Europe in remarkable numbers during the 4th millennium BC. These structures typically consisted of massive upright stones supporting equally impressive capstones, creating chamber spaces that served as collective burial facilities for successive generations. The Polnabrone dolmen in Ireland features a capstone weighing approximately 12 tons balanced on 3 upright supports, creating a chamber space that contained the remains of over 30 individuals along with personal ornaments, pottery vessels, and stone tools accumulated over several centuries of use. The nighttime presence of dolmens in the landscape must have been powerful. These structures, standing free in open landscapes, were visible from considerable distances. In moonlight, the massive stones cast deep shadows, creating dramatic contrasts of light and dark. The chamber space beneath the capstone became a pool of deeper darkness, a void in the landscape that invited and repelled in equal measure. Communities who used dolmens for burial developed complex rituals around death and the treatment of the dead. Bodies were often not placed in the dolmen immediately upon death but were instead processed elsewhere, perhaps exposed on platforms to allow decomposition, perhaps buried temporarily and then exhumed once the flesh had fallen away from the bones. This practice of secondary burial allowed families time to grieve, to prepare properly for the final disposition of the remains, to gather scattered community members for a funeral ceremony. Imagine a nighttime funeral procession approaching a dolmen. The bones of the deceased, cleaned and perhaps painted with red ochre, are carried in a special container, perhaps a basket, perhaps wrapped in fine cloth. Family members and community members accompany the bones in procession, carrying torches to light the way. The procession moves slowly, deliberately, chanting or singing songs appropriate to the occasion. As they reach the dolmen, the container of bones is brought into the chamber beneath the massive capstone. Previous burials are already there, bones sorted and arranged in patterns that perhaps have meaning we can no longer understand. Skulls might be grouped together, long bones stacked in parallel arrangements. The new arrival is added to this assemblage, the individual becoming part of the collective, their bones joining those of ancestors in a permanent resting place. After the bones are positioned, offerings might be made, pottery vessels containing food or drink, tools or weapons that the deceased used in life, ornaments that mark their status or identity. Prayers or invocations are spoken, asking ancestors to welcome the newly dead, asking for protection for the living, expressing the grief and loss that death inevitably brings. The procession returns to the settlement, leaving the bones of their loved one in the care of the ancestors, beneath the protective stones that will shield them for millennia to come. Those who participated in the ceremony carry the experience with them. The cool night air, the flickering torchlight, the massive stones looming overhead, the sight of ancestral bones arranged in the dolmen chamber, the emotional weight of adding new remains to that ancient collection. Menhirs, standing stones that could reach heights exceeding 20 meters and weights of over 300 tons, represented perhaps the most technically challenging megalithic constructions. The Grand Menhir Breeze at Loch Mariaker in Brittany, now fallen and broken into 4 pieces, originally stood over 20 meters high and weighed approximately 330 tons, making it one of the largest single stones ever erected by prehistoric peoples. The process of erecting such massive stones required engineering capabilities that approached the limits of what was possible using Neolithic technology. Teams of hundreds of people working together, coordinated by experienced leaders who understood the principles of leverage and balance, could accomplish what seems almost impossible to modern observers accustomed to mechanical equipment. But beyond the engineering achievement, these menhirs had spiritual and symbolic significance. Standing alone in the landscape, reaching toward the sky, they connected earth and heaven, the human realm and the cosmic realm. Their surfaces, sometimes left natural but sometimes carved with designs, spirals, cup marks, representations of tools or weapons, bore messages whose full meaning we may never understand. At night, menhirs acquired additional layers of meaning. The moon, passing behind a tall standing stone, would be occulted and then revealed, a dramatic visual effect that might have been interpreted as the stone interacting with celestial powers. Stars, framed by the stone's edges as they rose above the horizon, created alignments that careful observers could note and remember, building up astronomical knowledge over generations of watching. Ceremonies conducted around menhirs at night might have involved circumambulation, walking around the stone in prescribed patterns, perhaps multiple circuits, perhaps changing direction at certain points. The act of walking, especially in darkness, around such a massive stone would have been both meditative and slightly disorienting, particularly if participants had been fasting or had consumed substances that altered consciousness. Offerings might be placed at the base of menhirs: food, drink, valuable objects, gifts to the powers represented by or dwelling in the stone. Some menhirs show evidence of having had fires lit near them, the flames perhaps serving both practical purposes, providing light and warmth, and symbolic purposes, fire as a purifying force, fire as a medium of transformation that carries offerings to the spirit world. Stone circles, the most architecturally complex megalithic monuments, achieved their ultimate expression at Stonehenge, where construction occurred in multiple phases spanning over 1,500 years. The monument's final configuration, completed around 2500 BC, featured an outer circle of massive sarsen trilithons, paired upright stones topped by horizontal lintels, surrounding an inner horseshoe of even larger trilithons arranged with precise astronomical alignments. The shaping of sarsen stones at Stonehenge involved systematic pecking with hard hammerstones to remove unwanted material and create the precise geometries required for architectural stability. The lintels were shaped with curved undersurfaces that matched the tops of their supporting uprights, while mortise and tenon joints provided additional structural connection between elements. This level of precision in stonework required sophisticated understanding of three-dimensional geometry and the ability to visualize complex spatial relationships while working with materials that allowed no margin for error. Nighttime at Stonehenge must have been extraordinary. The massive stones, arranged in concentric patterns, created a complex interplay of solid stone and open space. Moonlight and starlight, filtered through the gaps between stones, created patterns of illumination and shadow that changed throughout the night as celestial bodies moved across the sky. The heel stone, positioned outside the main circle along the avenue leading to the monument, aligned with the midsummer sunrise, but it also aligned with the midwinter sunset, visible from within the circle, creating a year-round relationship between the monument and the sun's apparent movement. Ceremonies at Stonehenge almost certainly occurred at night as well as during the day, particularly during significant astronomical events. The summer solstice, when the sun rises directly over the heel stone as viewed from the center of the monument, is well known. But the winter solstice, when the setting sun would have been framed by the great trilithons, might have been equally or more important. Winter solstice represents the shortest day and longest night of the year, the moment when the sun seems to have retreated as far as possible but begins its return journey toward longer days and warmth. Imagine gathering at Stonehenge for winter solstice ceremonies. People arrive throughout the day, traveling from settlements scattered across the surrounding region. They bring food to share, materials for offerings, their best clothing and ornaments. As the short winter day progresses toward its end, anticipation builds. The setting sun, low on the horizon, sends its slanting rays through the stones, creating dramatic effects of light and shadow. As the sun finally sets, aligned with the stones in a way that occurs only on this one day of the year, the moment is marked with ceremony, perhaps a great shout from all assembled, perhaps chanting or singing, perhaps silence as people contemplate the mystery of celestial movements and their relationship to human life. The sun drops below the horizon, and darkness begins to gather. But the ceremony is not over. Throughout the long solstice night, fires burn within and around the stone circle. People gather around these fires, sharing food and drink, telling stories, performing dances and songs. The massive stones, barely visible in the firelight, seem to stand guard over these human activities, their ancient presence lending weight and significance to the gathering. As the night progresses toward dawn, attention turns toward the northeast, where the sun will eventually rise. The timing is crucial. Participants need to be in position, alert and watching, when the first light of the new day appears on the horizon. To miss the moment would be to fail in the ceremony's purpose. Finally, after long hours of darkness, the eastern sky begins to lighten. The stars fade as dawn approaches. Anticipation reaches its peak. Then, the first rays of the sun appear, beginning the shortest day of the year but also marking the turning point, the moment when the days will begin, imperceptibly at first but gathering momentum, to lengthen once again. The sun has returned. Life will continue. The cosmic order remains intact for another year. The emotional power of this moment, after the long night of watching and waiting, after the darkest time of the year, seeing the sun return in alignment with the ancient stones, must have been profound. Tears might have been shed, tears of relief, of joy, of spiritual release. The ceremony concludes with celebration, with gratitude expressed to whatever powers govern the sun's movement, with feasting and fellowship that extends into the new day. The astronomical alignments incorporated into megalithic architecture demonstrate sophisticated understanding of celestial cycles and their integration into ritual and agricultural calendars. The passage at Newgrange is precisely oriented to admit sunlight only during the winter solstice. The Callanish stone circle in Scotland incorporates multiple alignments that mark important positions of the moon during its 18.6-year cycle. Individual stones within various circles frame specific star rises that would have been visible to ancient observers. These alignments required sustained astronomical observation over multiple years or decades to identify relevant celestial patterns and calculate the precise orientations needed for architectural implementation. The complexity suggests the presence of specialist astronomer priests who maintain detailed knowledge of celestial cycles and their ritual significance. These individuals would have been responsible for determining the proper timing of ceremonies, predicting eclipses and other astronomical events, and maintaining the calendrical systems that coordinated agricultural and social activities. Nighttime was essential for this astronomical work. The movements of stars, planets, and the moon can only be observed in darkness. These ancient astronomers would have spent countless nights watching the sky, noting the positions of celestial bodies relative to landscape features or to markers they had placed, gradually building up the knowledge necessary to predict future positions and events. Imagine being such an astronomer priest, responsible for maintaining the community's astronomical knowledge. Night after night, you climb to your observation point, perhaps atop a special platform, perhaps a particular hill with clear views in all directions. You bring your recording devices, perhaps notched bones where you mark significant observations, perhaps stones placed in patterns that encode information, perhaps simply the vast memory you've trained to hold complex information. The night sky spreads above you, vast and slowly turning. You know the major constellations intimately, can identify individual bright stars, understand the patterns of planetary movement. Tonight you're tracking the moon, noting its position relative to the stones of a nearby circle. Over many months and years, you've noticed that the moon's rising and setting positions shift along the horizon, moving between northern and southern extremes in a cycle that takes over 18 years to complete. This knowledge is valuable, even essential. The moon's cycles correlate with tides for coastal communities. They provide a calendar independent of the solar year. They mark times suitable for different activities: planting, harvesting, conducting certain ceremonies. Your observations, and the observations of your predecessors stretching back generations, have revealed these patterns and allowed the community to organize its activities in harmony with celestial rhythms. The work can be cold and lonely, especially in winter when the nights are longest. But there's also deep satisfaction in it. The feeling of connecting with cosmic patterns, of understanding something fundamental about the universe's operation, of fulfilling an important role in the community's spiritual and practical life. As dawn approaches and your night of observation ends, you record your final notes, review what you've learned, and make your way back to the settlement. You will sleep during the day, recovering from the night's work, then rise again as evening comes to continue your eternal watch of the heavens. Sacred landscapes emerged during this period as communities began integrating natural features with human-made monuments to create comprehensive ritual environments that encompassed entire regions. The Orkney landscape around the Ring of Brodger includes over 100 megalithic monuments arranged in patterns that reflect both practical considerations and symbolic relationships with topographic features. The positioning of monuments appears to have been coordinated to create sight lines between different sites while incorporating prominent hills, water bodies, and other natural landmarks into unified ceremonial complexes. The Avebury landscape in Wiltshire represents perhaps the most sophisticated example of integrated ritual geography, with a massive stone circle connected to other monuments through a complex system of avenues, cursus monuments, and burial sites that extends across several square kilometers. The West Kennet Avenue, marked by paired standing stones extending for 2.5 kilometers, created a processional route that connected Avebury with the sanctuary on Overton Hill while passing numerous burial mounds and other ritual sites. Walking these processional routes at night would have created powerful experiences. Imagine participating in a nighttime procession along the West Kennet Avenue. Torches light the way, their flames flickering in the night breeze. The paired stones of the avenue rise on either side, creating a defined path through the landscape, guiding the procession toward its destination. The journey is not rushed. The procession moves at a measured pace, allowing participants to maintain formation, to chant or sing together, to contemplate the significance of the journey. The landscape around the avenue is barely visible in the darkness, but the avenue stones stand out, marking the sacred path that connects one holy site to another. As the procession moves along the avenue, it passes burial mounds, ancient barrows where ancestors sleep. Respect is paid as the procession passes these resting places. Perhaps a pause in the chanting, perhaps a gesture of reverence, perhaps an offering left at the barrow's base. The dead are not forgotten, even in the midst of ceremonies for the living. Finally, the procession reaches its destination. What ceremonies are conducted there, we can only imagine. Rituals of initiation perhaps, seasonal celebrations, gatherings to mark important community decisions or events. What matters is that the journey itself, the movement through the sacred landscape along the prescribed route, forms an essential part of the ritual. The act of walking together at night, along a path defined by ancient stones, creates bonds and experiences that purely verbal or symbolic rituals cannot match. The integration of water features into megalithic landscapes reflects beliefs about the sacred properties of springs, rivers, and lakes that connected the terrestrial world with supernatural realms. Many stone circles and burial monuments were positioned near significant water sources. Some were deliberately sited to incorporate views of distant water bodies or to channel seasonal water flow through or around the monuments themselves. Water, essential to life, often held sacred significance in ancient religions. Springs, where water emerged from the hidden depths of the earth, might be seen as portals to the underworld or as gifts from subterranean deities. Rivers, flowing endlessly toward the sea, might represent the passage of time or the journey of souls after death. Lakes, their surfaces reflecting the sky, might be seen as mirrors between the earthly and celestial realms. Nighttime ceremonies involving water would have been especially evocative. Imagine a ritual conducted at a spring near a stone circle. The participants gather in darkness, their only light from torches or small lamps. The spring water, emerging cold and clear from the earth, flows past them with constant sound, a whisper or a gurgle depending on the spring's force. Offerings are made to the spring, precious objects thrown into the water, never to be recovered. Food or drink poured out as libations. Prayers spoken asking for the spring to continue flowing, for the water to remain pure and health-giving, for the powers associated with the spring to look favorably on the community. The water, barely visible in the dim light, seems mysterious and alive. Its constant movement and sound create a sense of presence, as if the spring itself is a living entity that hears and responds to human entreaties. Participants might drink from the spring, consuming its sacred water as a form of communion with the powers it represents. They might bathe in it, seeking purification or healing. As the ceremony concludes and participants return to their homes, they carry with them the memory of the spring's cold water, its constant voice, the sense of touching something ancient and powerful that existed long before humans and will continue long after. While Atlantic Europe was developing its megalithic traditions, communities across Eurasia were simultaneously creating their own distinctive responses to the challenges and opportunities of Neolithic life. These regional variations reflected not merely different solutions to similar problems but fundamentally different ways of organizing society, understanding the natural world, and experiencing the daily and nightly rhythms of life. The linear pottery culture, known to archaeologists as Linear Keramic or LBK, emerged around 5500 BC in the fertile river valleys of Central Europe and represents one of the most successful and far-reaching cultural expansions in human prehistory. Within just 5 centuries, LBK communities had spread from the Danube basin across an area extending from eastern France to western Ukraine, establishing a remarkably uniform cultural tradition across this vast territory. The longhouses that characterized LBK settlements represented a distinctive architectural tradition adapted to the forest environments of temperate Europe. These massive timber structures, some exceeding 40 meters in length, were constructed using sophisticated post and beam techniques that required advanced woodworking skills and careful planning of structural elements. The internal organization of LBK longhouses reflected complex social arrangements that accommodated extended families while providing spaces for specialized activities. Imagine an evening in an LBK longhouse. The structure is divided into distinct functional areas: residential spaces in the central portions, storage areas at one end, possibly workshops or animal housing at the other. The family gathers in the residential area as darkness falls. A hearth provides warmth and light, its smoke rising to the roof where gaps between the thatching allow it to escape. The longhouse accommodates multiple family units, perhaps representing several generations or several brothers with their wives and children. Each family unit has its own space within the larger structure, but the building itself creates a sense of collective identity. The people living here are related by blood or marriage, bound together by ties of kinship and mutual obligation. Evening activities in the longhouse might include food preparation and consumption, craft work that can be done by firelight, storytelling and conversation, care of children, and eventually settling into sleep. The long open interior of the house creates interesting acoustic properties. Conversations at one end can be heard at the other, though distance and the crackling of fires make the words indistinct. This creates a kind of ambient social soundscape. You can hear that others are talking, laughing, working, but you're not necessarily following their specific conversations. Children play together throughout the longhouse, running from one end to the other, mixing with cousins and siblings in ways that build strong bonds of family identity. As evening progresses and they grow tired, they settle onto sleeping platforms or into specific sleeping areas, gradually quieting until all are asleep. Adults remain awake longer, tending to final tasks, checking that tools are ready for tomorrow's work, ensuring adequate firewood is stored nearby for the night and morning, discussing plans and concerns. The longhouse, which during the day might be largely empty as people worked in fields or forests, becomes in the evening a center of family and social life, a place where relationships are maintained and reinforced through daily interaction. The Yangshao culture, developing along the Yellow River and its tributaries in northern China beginning around 5000 BC, created a distinctive Neolithic tradition adapted to the unique environmental conditions of the Chinese Loess Plateau. Yangshao settlements were characterized by semi-subterranean houses, elaborate painted pottery, and sophisticated millet cultivation systems that would form the foundation for Chinese agricultural civilization. The semi-subterranean construction technique involved excavating circular or rectangular pits approximately 1 meter deep, then constructing timber-framed walls and thatched roofs that created well-insulated living spaces suitable for the extreme temperature variations of continental China. These houses, partially below ground level, provided excellent protection from both summer heat and winter cold. Imagine an evening in a Yangshao settlement. The semi-subterranean houses dot the landscape, their thatched roofs visible at ground level, smoke from cooking fires rising from roof openings. As families descend the few steps from ground level into their homes, they enter spaces that are cooler than the outside in summer, warmer in winter, the earth itself providing insulation. Inside, the houses are surprisingly comfortable. The earthen walls and floor are smoothed and sometimes plastered. Sleeping platforms or designated sleeping areas are arranged around the interior. A central hearth provides warmth and light, while also serving for cooking. Storage jars, some of them decorated with the elaborate painted designs for which Yangshao pottery is famous, line the walls containing millet grain, dried vegetables and other provisions. The family gathers around the hearth for the evening meal. The staple food is millet, prepared in various ways, as porridge, as flatbreads, fermented into alcoholic beverages. The nutty flavor of millet, familiar from birth, tastes of home and security. Conversation during the meal covers the day's events, plans for tomorrow, news from other families in the settlement, seasonal observations about weather and crop conditions. After the meal, the family remains around the fire for a while longer. Work continues on whatever projects are current. A father shapes a stone tool, a mother works on a piece of pottery or textile, older children practice skills they're learning. Younger children play quietly, eventually growing drowsy and being settled into sleeping areas. The semi-subterranean design of the house creates a particular quality of quietness. Sounds from outside, wind, animal calls, activities in other houses, are muffled by the earth walls. The interior of the house becomes a cocoon, insulated from the outside world, a secure space where family life unfolds protected from external disturbances. As the fire burns down and family members settle into sleep, the house grows dark and quiet. The breathing of sleepers, the occasional crackling as the fire collapses into embers, the distant barking of a dog somewhere in the settlement, these are the only sounds in the peaceful night. Far to the northeast, the Jaman culture of Japan was simultaneously developing one of the world's most sophisticated hunter-gatherer traditions, demonstrating that complex societies could emerge without agricultural foundations. The Jaman people, whose culture persisted from approximately 14,000 to 300 BC, created elaborate pottery traditions, monumental architecture and sophisticated resource management systems while maintaining economies based entirely on hunting, fishing, and gathering. The Senai Murayama site in northern Japan reveals a Jaman settlement that supported over 500 residents for more than 1,500 years, making it one of the largest and most stable prehistoric communities in the world. The pit houses characteristic of many Jaman sites were constructed by excavating circular or oval depressions and erecting timber frameworks that supported thatched roofs extending to ground level. Imagine an evening at Senai Murayama. The settlement consists of numerous pit houses scattered across the landscape, along with storage buildings raised on stilts and a massive timber structure. The Great Pillar building featuring 6 enormous chestnut posts, each over 1 meter in diameter, creating a structure of unclear purpose but obvious significance. As darkness falls, families gather in their pit houses. These structures, like the Yangshao houses, are partially subterranean, providing excellent insulation. But the Jaman climate presents different challenges: cold winters with heavy snow, humid summers, seasonal typhoons. The pit house design handles all these conditions effectively. Inside a pit house, the evening scene centers around the hearth. The day's catch, fish from the nearby ocean or river, perhaps game from the surrounding forests, has been prepared for the evening meal. The Jaman diet was remarkably diverse, including fish, shellfish, wild game, nuts, especially chestnuts, wild plants and a variety of other resources exploited according to seasonal availability. The family's pottery vessels, some of them decorated with elaborate cord-marked patterns or fantastic three-dimensional sculptural elements, are used for cooking and serving food. The Jaman produced some of the most artistically sophisticated pottery of the entire Neolithic world, vessels that transcended mere utilitarian function to become works of art. Using these vessels for daily meals connected the family to artistic traditions and aesthetic values that defined their culture. After the meal, evening activities might include tool maintenance and manufacturing, creating new fishing hooks from bone, repairing hunting weapons, crafting nets or traps. These activities could be performed by firelight, though the detail work might be saved for daylight hours. Storytelling would have been important, passing down knowledge about resource locations, seasonal timing, traditional techniques, and cultural history through oral narratives. The long-term stability of Jaman settlements like Senai Murayama, inhabited for over a millennium, meant that families had deep connections to place. Grandparents could tell stories of their own grandparents, creating oral histories spanning many generations. Specific locations in the surrounding landscape would have accumulated associations and meanings. This is where grandfather caught the great salmon, that grove is where we collect the best chestnuts, those rocks are sacred because of the spirits that dwell there. As night deepened and the family settled into sleep in their pit house, they were surrounded by this web of connections, to place, to ancestors, to community, to the natural world that sustained them. Their sleep was the sleep of people secure in their place in the world, confident in their knowledge and skills, connected to a cultural tradition that had proven its viability over thousands of years. The lake-dwelling cultures that emerged in the alpine regions of Switzerland, Germany, and Austria around 4000 BC created distinctive settlement forms adapted to wetland environments. These communities constructed their villages on artificial platforms supported by thousands of wooden piles driven into lake beds, creating stable foundations for houses and other structures while providing protection from floods and hostile neighbors. The Hornstadt-Hornell site on Lake Constance exemplifies the sophisticated engineering capabilities of alpine lake dwellers, with its platform supported by over 100,000 wooden piles arranged in systematic patterns that distributed structural loads across the lake bed. Living on these lake platforms created a unique daily and nightly experience, different from land-based settlements in fundamental ways. Imagine an evening in a lake-dwelling village. The sun sets over the water, painting the lake surface with brilliant oranges and reds. The platform supporting the village creates a stable surface, but the slight movement of water beneath is always perceptible, a gentle motion that lake dwellers grow so accustomed to that they might feel uncomfortable on solid, unmoving ground. As darkness falls, lamps are lit in the houses, small clay vessels filled with animal fat, with wicks of plant fiber that provide gentle illumination. The reflection of these lights on the water creates a magical effect, each lamp creating a pool of light that dances on the rippling surface. The sounds of evening in a lake dwelling are distinctive. The lapping of water against the piles that support the platform creates a constant gentle rhythm. Fish jumping in the lake make splashing sounds. Waterfowl settling in for the night call to each other. The creaking of the wooden platform and house structures as they shift slightly with the water's movement. All these sounds blend into an ambient soundscape utterly different from that of land-based settlements. Fishing plays a major role in the lake-dwelling economy, and evening might include preparation of fishing equipment for the next day, checking nets for damage and making repairs, sharpening fishing spears, preparing hooks and lines. The fish caught that day are preserved through various methods: smoking, drying, salting, ensuring a reliable protein supply even when fishing conditions are unfavorable. The waterlogged conditions that have preserved so much organic material from lake-dwelling sites mean we know more about their daily life than we do about many other prehistoric communities. We know they had sophisticated wooden tools, elaborate textiles, leather goods, even preserved food remains. This abundance of evidence reveals communities of remarkable technological sophistication and artistic achievement. As a lake-dwelling family settles into sleep, they do so rocked by the gentle movement of water beneath their platform home, serenaded by the sounds of the lake and its inhabitants, secure in their houses built with great skill and effort to create a stable home in what might seem an unstable environment. Desert adaptations in North Africa during this period produced equally remarkable innovations as communities developed strategies for exploiting arid environments. The Sahara during the early to mid-Holocene experienced much more humid conditions than today, supporting grassland and woodland environments that could sustain substantial human populations. However, as conditions gradually became more arid after 5000 BC, communities were forced to develop increasingly sophisticated adaptations to water scarcity and environmental unpredictability. The rock art sites of the Central Sahara provide exceptional documentation of the cultural and environmental changes that occurred during this period. The Tasselai Eniger Plateau in Algeria contains thousands of rock paintings and engravings that chronicle the transition from humid to arid conditions through their depictions of changing fauna and human activities. Imagine a pastoral community in the Sahara during this transitional period, when the region was becoming drier but not yet the desert it is today. The community moves seasonally, following the rains and the grass that feeds their cattle herds. They know the landscape intimately, every spring, every seasonal water source, every patch of vegetation that might provide forage during dry periods. Evening in this pastoral camp finds the cattle herded into a protective enclosure, guarded by dogs and human watchers who will maintain vigilance through the night against predators. The people gather around fires, scattered across the camping area in family groups. The evening meal features milk and sometimes meat from the herds, supplemented by gathered wild foods, seeds, tubers, fruits, whatever the current location provides. The night sky in the Sahara, unpolluted and at high altitude, displays the stars with extraordinary brilliance. The Milky Way blazes across the heavens. Individual stars shine with a steady, unwavering light. The movements of planets, the appearances of comets, the rare spectacular displays of meteor storms, all are visible with a clarity that few modern people ever experience. For pastoralists navigating across the Sahara, astronomical knowledge is essential. The stars provide direction for travel. Certain stars or constellations mark significant directions: the way to important water sources, the route to seasonal camping sites, the direction toward distant trading partners. This knowledge is carefully taught to young people, ensuring that each generation can navigate successfully. The megalithic monuments constructed at sites like Nabta Playa demonstrate that pastoral communities were capable of sophisticated astronomical observations and monumental architecture despite their mobile lifestyles. The stone circles and alignments at the site incorporate precise orientations to celestial phenomena, including the summer solstice sunrise and the rising of specific star groups that would have been important for calendrical and navigational purposes. Nighttime ceremonies at these Saharan stone circles might have brought together multiple pastoral groups who otherwise spent most of their time scattered across the landscape. These gatherings, occurring at significant times of the year, would have served multiple purposes: renewing social bonds, conducting ceremonies and rituals, exchanging information about water sources and grazing conditions, arranging marriages, resolving disputes. As night fell over the stone circle, fires would be lit and celebrations would begin. Music and dancing, storytelling and feasting, all the activities that bind communities together and create shared identity. Young people would watch older ones, learning the traditions and customs of their people. Children would play together, forming friendships that might last for years despite the mobile lifestyle that meant they wouldn't see each other frequently. When the ceremonies concluded and the different groups departed to continue their seasonal migrations, they carried with them renewed commitment to their shared culture and identity. The stone circle remained a permanent marker on the landscape, a place they would return to in future years to gather again. Language family dispersals during this period appear to correlate closely with the expansion of agricultural populations and the establishment of new cultural traditions across vast geographical areas. The spread of Indo-European languages across Europe and parts of Asia may have been associated with the westward expansion of pastoral peoples from the Pontic-Caspian steppes. The dispersal of Sino-Tibetan languages could reflect the expansion of millet farming populations from northern China. These linguistic expansions involved not merely the adoption of new languages by existing populations but substantial demographic movements that introduced new genetic lineages along with cultural and technological innovations. The Kurgan culture of the Pontic-Caspian steppes, emerging around 4000 BC, developed distinctive burial practices and material culture traditions that would spread across much of Europe during subsequent millennia. The characteristic burial mounds or kurgans that give the culture its name contained elaborate graves with wheeled vehicles, horse remains, and sophisticated metalwork that reflect the emergence of pastoral societies with advanced transportation technologies. The Maykop kurgan in the northern Caucasus contained over 5,000 gold and silver objects along with the remains of wheeled vehicles and horse harness equipment, demonstrating the wealth and technological sophistication achieved by steppe pastoral elites. Imagine a nighttime burial ceremony for a high-status individual in Kurgan culture. The deceased, a chieftain or important person in the community, lies in state while final preparations are made for the burial. The kurgan, the earthen mound that will cover the burial chamber, has been partially prepared, with a deep pit excavated and a wooden chamber constructed at its base. As night falls, the funeral procession begins. The body, dressed in finest garments and adorned with gold and silver ornaments, is carried to the burial chamber. Grave goods are added, weapons that the deceased used in life, tools and utensils they will need in the afterlife according to the beliefs of their people, vessels containing food and drink for the journey ahead. A sacrificed horse, representing the deceased's wealth and status, is placed in the grave. Perhaps a wheeled vehicle is also included, its wooden wheels and axle demonstrating the advanced technology that gave steppe peoples mobility and trading advantages. Other offerings, precious metals, imported goods from distant lands, objects of personal significance, are arranged around the body. As the grave goods are positioned and final prayers or invocations spoken, torches illuminate the scene. The flickering light catches the gleam of gold, the sheen of bronze, the smooth finish of polished pottery. This is a person being sent into death with honor and respect, their community investing substantial wealth in ensuring they are properly equipped for whatever comes after life. The wooden chamber is sealed and the filling of the kurgan begins. Earth is shoveled into the pit, gradually covering the chamber and its contents. The work continues through the night, the community working together to raise the mound that will mark the burial site for millennia to come. As dawn breaks, the kurgan stands complete, a permanent marker of the deceased's importance and the community's ability to mobilize labor for monumental construction. The mourners depart, but they will return to this kurgan for future ceremonies, keeping alive the memory of the person buried there and maintaining connection with their ancestral dead. The development of bronze metallurgy required understanding complex alloying processes that transformed relatively soft copper into hard, durable metal suitable for tools and weapons superior to their stone predecessors. The discovery that adding tin to copper in proportions of approximately 10 to 12% produced an alloy with enhanced hardness, castability, and corrosion resistance emerged through systematic experimentation conducted by specialist metalworkers across multiple regions. The technical challenges of bronze production exceeded those of simple copper working by several orders of magnitude. Bronze casting required precise temperature control to achieve proper alloy composition, while the creation of complex objects demanded sophisticated mold-making techniques using stone, clay, or sand matrices. The lost wax casting process, which appeared around 3000 BC, enabled metalworkers to create intricate objects with internal cavities and complex surface details that would have been impossible using simple open molds. Imagine the workshop of a bronze smith as evening approaches. The day's work has been intense, maintaining the furnace at precise temperatures, carefully adding tin to molten copper in exact proportions, pouring the resulting bronze into molds, monitoring the cooling process. The smith is exhausted, his face smudged with soot, his arms aching from the physical labor of metalworking. But the work is not quite finished. The furnace must be banked for the night, its fire dampened but not extinguished, so that it can be brought back to working temperature more easily tomorrow. Tools must be cleaned and organized. The day's castings must be checked, removed from their molds if they've cooled sufficiently, examined for flaws, set aside for finishing work. The bronze objects gleaming in the lamplight represent substantial investments of materials, skill, and labor. The tin itself, required for bronze production, comes from distant sources, possibly hundreds of kilometers away, transported along trade routes that connect the smith's community with tin-producing regions. The copper too must be obtained through trade or mining. Each bronze object represents not just the smith's work but an entire network of procurement, exchange, and specialized knowledge. As the smith finally completes his evening tasks and makes his way home, he carries with him the satisfaction of skilled work accomplished but also the weight of responsibility. He possesses knowledge that few others have, the secrets of temperature control, alloy proportions, mold making, finishing techniques. This knowledge gives him status and economic security, but it also means he must be careful about sharing it. Bronze working is becoming a specialized craft controlled by a select few, and maintaining that exclusivity is part of maintaining the craft's value. At home, the smith's family enjoys benefits of his specialized work. They eat well, thanks to the income his bronze working provides. They possess high-quality tools and utensils, some made of bronze rather than cheaper materials. They have connections with other elite families, as bronze smiths occupy important positions in increasingly stratified Bronze Age societies. As the smith settles into sleep, his mind might still be working through technical problems. How to achieve a better finish on a particular casting, how to reduce the occurrence of pores and flaws in the metal, how to create more complex designs using the lost wax process. This mental work continues even in sleep, as dreams process the day's experiences and sometimes produce insights that lead to technical innovations. The social implications of bronze technology extended far beyond improved tool performance to encompass fundamental changes in economic organization and political power. Bronze production required access to tin sources that were geographically restricted and often located hundreds of kilometers from copper deposits, creating dependencies on long-distance trade networks that could be controlled by emerging political elites. Control over metal production became a primary source of political power as bronze weapons provided decisive military advantages over stone-armed opponents. The earliest bronze weapons appeared around 3200 BC in the form of simple daggers and spearheads, but weapon technology rapidly evolved to include sophisticated swords, axes, and specialized military equipment that required substantial investments in raw materials and skilled craftsmanship. Warrior elites emerged as dominant social classes in many regions as bronze weapons technology created new military capabilities and altered traditional power relationships. The appearance of elaborate warrior burials containing bronze swords, spearheads, and defensive equipment marks a fundamental shift toward militarized societies where martial prowess became a primary source of social status. Imagine the evening in the hall of a Bronze Age warrior chief. The hall is the largest and most impressive building in the settlement, its timber construction demonstrating sophisticated carpentry and representing a substantial investment of labor and materials. Inside, the chief sits in a place of honor, surrounded by his warriors and other important members of the community. The evening meal is a communal affair, with food and drink shared according to status and hierarchy. The chief receives the best portions, followed by his most important warriors, then other community members in descending order of importance. This ritualized sharing of food reinforces social structure and creates bonds of obligation and loyalty. After the meal, the warriors might engage in contests of skill and strength, wrestling matches, weapon demonstrations, displays of horsemanship if horses are available. These competitions serve multiple purposes. They provide entertainment, they allow warriors to demonstrate their abilities and establish pecking orders, they maintain the physical conditioning necessary for effective combat. Stories are told of past battles, of heroic deeds, of ancestors who achieved glory through their martial prowess. These stories serve as both entertainment and instruction, conveying cultural values about courage, honor, and proper warrior behavior. Young men listen intently, imagining themselves performing similar deeds, aspiring to the status and respect that successful warriors enjoy. As the evening progresses, some warriors might repair equipment, sharpening bronze swords or spearheads, adjusting leather armor, checking that shields remain sturdy and functional. This maintenance work is essential. Weapons and armor that fail in battle can mean the difference between life and death. Eventually, even warriors must sleep. They retire to sleeping areas within or near the chief's hall, or to their own homes if they have them. But unlike the peaceful sleep of farmers or craftspeople, warriors' sleep might be troubled by the knowledge that conflict could come at any time, that their skills might be tested in deadly combat with little warning. The development of hierarchical chiefdoms during this period reflected the need for centralized authority capable of organizing complex economic activities, managing territorial disputes, and coordinating military operations. Archaeological evidence from sites across Europe and the Near East reveals the emergence of palace complexes with specialized administrative areas, storage facilities, and workshops that indicate sophisticated bureaucratic organization. Fortification construction reached unprecedented levels of sophistication as communities invested heavily in defensive architecture designed to protect against bronze-armed attackers. The hill fort at Maiden Castle in England underwent major expansion during this period, with defensive circuits incorporating multiple lines of earthworks, elaborate entrance systems, and specialized areas for storing weapons and supplies. The construction of these massive fortifications required coordinated labor involving thousands of workers over multiple construction seasons, demonstrating the organizational capabilities of emerging political authorities. But beyond the practical defensive functions, these fortifications also served symbolic purposes. They demonstrated the power and wealth of the communities that built them, they marked territorial boundaries and claims, they created visible landmarks that reinforced community identity. Imagine standing guard on the ramparts of a Bronze Age hill fort as night falls. Your shift has just begun and you will remain here for several hours, watching for any sign of approaching enemies. The fortifications around you represent years of labor by your community, earthen ramparts raised through countless basketfuls of dirt, ditches excavated to create obstacles for attackers, timber palisades constructed from trees felled and shaped with bronze axes. The view from your position encompasses the surrounding countryside. During the day you can see for miles, able to spot approaching groups while they're still far away. At night, your vision is much more limited, but you can still detect movement, especially if attackers carry torches or if the moon is bright. The night is quiet, broken only by natural sounds, wind rustling through grass, the distant call of an owl, small animals moving in the darkness. You remain alert despite the apparent peace. Attacks can come at any time, and sentries who fall asleep at their posts face severe punishment, as their negligence could endanger the entire community. Other guards are stationed around the fortifications at regular intervals, close enough that you can call to each other if needed but far enough apart to provide comprehensive coverage. This watch duty is shared among all able-bodied members of the community, a collective responsibility that everyone must fulfill. Even in times of peace, the watch continues because the peace might end at any moment. As your shift progresses and the night deepens, you think about your family sleeping safely within the fortifications. Your wife, your children, your parents if they still live, all depend on you and the other guards to keep them safe. This responsibility weighs heavily, but it also provides purpose and meaning. You are protecting what matters most, doing your part to ensure the community's survival. Eventually, your relief arrives and you can finally go home to sleep. But even in sleep, part of you remains alert, ready to wake instantly if alarm is raised, ready to grab your weapons and rush to defend your community if attack comes. The transformation of burial practices during the Bronze Age reflects fundamental changes in social organization and religious beliefs that accompanied technological innovation. The shift from collective burial in megalithic tombs to individual interment in barrows and cist graves indicates increasing emphasis on personal achievement and hereditary status rather than communal identity. The Lübingen burial in Germany, dating to approximately 1940 BC, contained a wooden chamber housing an elderly male accompanied by bronze weapons, gold ornaments, and exotic materials that demonstrate the wealth accumulation possible for successful Bronze Age elites. The burial represents not just the death of an individual but the display of an entire lifetime's accumulation of wealth and status. Imagine the funeral preparations for such an elite burial. The deceased has died, and the community enters a period of mourning. But beyond the personal grief of family members, there is also recognition of the political implications. This was an important person, and their burial must reflect that importance. The burial chamber is constructed with care, using the finest materials available. A pit is excavated, carefully shaped and lined. A wooden chamber is built within it, its timber selected for quality and worked with bronze tools to create smooth, precise joints. The chamber is large enough to accommodate not just the body but also the substantial grave goods that will accompany the deceased. The body is prepared with elaborate care, washed, anointed with oils or unguents, dressed in finest garments. Gold ornaments are added, arm rings, torques for the neck, decorative pins and fasteners. Bronze weapons are placed nearby, a sword in its scabbard, spearheads, perhaps an axe. These weapons, beautifully made and well maintained, represent both the deceased's warrior status and the community's metalworking capabilities. As night falls on the day of burial, the community gathers for the funeral. The body, lying in state, is visible to all who come to pay respects. Stories are told of the deceased's life and accomplishments, battles fought and won, wise decisions made, wealth accumulated and generously shared, alliances forged. These stories serve multiple purposes. They honor the dead, they provide examples for the living, they reinforce social values about what makes a life worth celebrating. Finally, the body is placed in the prepared chamber along with all the grave goods. The chamber is sealed, and the barrow mound is raised over it, earth piled high through the labor of many people, creating a permanent marker on the landscape. As dawn breaks, the barrow stands complete, and the community begins the process of moving forward without their leader, while never forgetting them. The environmental impact of Bronze Age societies exceeded that of earlier Neolithic communities through intensified mining operations, expanded agricultural systems, and increased population densities that fundamentally altered natural landscapes. Copper mining at sites like the Great Orme in Wales involved the excavation of over 5 kilometers of underground tunnels that removed thousands of tons of ore-bearing rock from hillside deposits. These mining operations required systematic forest clearance to provide fuel for smelting operations, while the associated settlements created permanent anthropogenic landscapes where human activities dominated natural processes. The landscape began to bear the permanent marks of human exploitation. Hills scarred by mining, forests cut down and not regrowing, fields that had been cultivated for so long that natural vegetation communities were entirely replaced. Yet life continued with its daily and nightly rhythms. Miners who spent their days underground in dark, dangerous tunnels emerged to evenings spent with family and community. Farmers who worked bronze-tipped plows through heavy soils returned home as darkness fell, their muscles aching but satisfied with the day's work. Metal workers who had spent hours maintaining precise furnace temperatures finally allowed fires to bank and headed home for rest. The Knights of the Bronze Age, despite all the technological and social changes, still followed ancient patterns. The sun still set, darkness still fell, stars still emerged in the sky. Families still gathered around fires, still prepared and shared evening meals, still told stories and maintained social bonds through conversation and companionship. Children still grew drowsy as the evening progressed, still needed to be settled into sleeping areas and soothed into slumber. And when sleep finally came, whether to elite warriors in their halls or to common farmers in their simple homes, it was still the ancient, necessary sleep that all humans require. The nightly journey into unconsciousness where the body rests and repairs, where the mind processes the day's experiences, where dreams transport the sleeper to realms beyond waking understanding. And so we come to the end of our journey through the nights of ancient times, through the peaceful evenings and restful sleep of our distant ancestors. From the Ice Age camps where humans gathered around fires beneath star-filled skies, through the first permanent settlements where dedicated sleeping spaces provided comfort and security, past the great megalithic monuments where ceremonies connected the living with the dead and with cosmic powers, across the diverse cultures that developed their own unique ways of experiencing the rhythm of day and night, to the Bronze Age when technological sophistication reached new heights but the basic human need for rest and renewal remained unchanged. Throughout all these thousands of years, despite tremendous changes in technology, social organization and cultural practices, certain fundamental aspects of human experience remained constant. The night brought relief from the labors of the day. Darkness invited rest. Sleep restored body and mind. Dreams transported consciousness to realms of symbol and metaphor. And morning brought awakening to new possibilities. The people we visited on this journey, Natufian gatherers processing wild cereals, Göbekli Tepe builders erecting massive stone pillars, Catalhoyuk residents living in their densely packed urban environment, Chinese rice farmers tending their flooded paddies, Jaman hunters and gatherers maintaining sustainable resource use, lake dwellers building their remarkable pile-supported villages, Saharan pastoralists navigating by the stars, Bronze Age warriors and smiths, all of them knew the comfort of evening rest, the necessity of nightly sleep, the renewal that comes with dawn. Their lives were in many ways profoundly different from ours. They lacked the technologies we take for granted, the medical knowledge that extends our lives, the communication systems that connect us globally. They faced hardships and challenges we can barely imagine. Constant threats from disease, frequent hunger when harvests failed, ever-present danger from hostile neighbors or wild animals, the harsh reality of high infant mortality and short life expectancies. Yet in other ways their experiences mirror our own. They loved their children and worried about their futures. They formed deep friendships and experienced the pain of loss when loved ones died. They took pride in work well done, found satisfaction in creative expression, sought meaning in religious and spiritual practices. They laughed and cried, hoped and feared, dreamed and wondered about the nature of existence. And when night came, they sought the same thing we seek now as you lie in your bed, preparing for sleep. They sought rest, peace, comfort, and the renewal that comes from surrendering consciousness to sleep's embrace. The ancient practices we've explored tonight, the evening gatherings around fires, the rituals that mark transitions from day to night, the stories told to children to ease them into sleep, the prayers and invocations spoken in darkness, the astronomical observations conducted beneath star-filled skies, the ceremonies held at sacred monuments when darkness enhanced their mystery and power. All of these represent humanity's timeless engagement with the cycle of waking and sleeping, light and darkness, activity and rest. In our modern world, with electric lights that banish darkness at the flip of a switch, with screens that keep us engaged long after the sun has set, with work schedules that ignore natural rhythms, we have in many ways lost touch with the patterns our ancestors knew so intimately. We stay awake when our bodies long for sleep. We flood our environments with artificial light when darkness would serve us better. We engage with stimulating content when quiet and calm would better prepare us for rest. Perhaps there is wisdom in looking back to those ancient nights, to the way our ancestors honored the boundary between day and night, respected the body's need for darkness and rest, created rituals and practices that eased the transition from waking to sleeping. They understood something we have partly forgotten, that night is not merely the absence of day but a time with its own character and value, that darkness is not something to be feared and banished but something to be accepted and even welcomed. As you drift towards sleep now, imagine yourself sitting by an ancient fire, its warm glow pushing back the night just enough to create a circle of light and safety. Around you, your community, family, friends, neighbors, all settling into the peaceful rhythms of evening. The day's work is done. Tomorrow's challenges can wait for tomorrow. Right now, in this moment, there is only the present. The warmth of the fire, the stars overhead, the comfort of companionship, the approach of sleep. Let your breathing slow and deepen the way it naturally does as sleep approaches. Feel your muscles relaxing, releasing the tensions they've held throughout the day. Your eyelids growing heavy, harder to keep open. Your thoughts becoming less focused, more dreamlike as the boundary between waking and sleeping begins to blur. You are safe. You are comfortable. You are exactly where you need to be. Just as countless humans before you across thousands of years and in every corner of the world have settled into sleep at the end of their days, so too can you now release your hold on waking consciousness and allow sleep to come. The ancient rhythms continue, unbroken since the first humans walked the earth. Day follows day in eternal cycle. The stars wheel overhead in their ancient patterns. The moon waxes and wanes. The seasons turn. And through it all, humans sleep and wake and sleep again, our individual lives brief flickers against the vast span of human history, yet each life precious, each person deserving of rest and peace. Sleep well, traveler through time. Dream peacefully. Rest deeply. And when morning comes, as it always does, may you wake refreshed and renewed, ready to face whatever this new day brings. The ancient ones sleep beneath their barrows and in their stone chambers, their bones long turned to dust, but their legacy lives on in us, their descendants, carrying forward the great human adventure into an unknown future. Tonight, as you sleep, you join them in the timeless human experience of nightly rest, connecting across the millennia to all who have slept before and all who will sleep after. Good night. Sleep peacefully. Rest well.